I would like to welcome everybody to tonight's program for Triangle Free Thought Society. I'm going to bother you with annoying, boring things for a minute before we get started. Triangle Free Thought Society is a member-supported organization dedicated to creating a community for atheists, agnostics, secularists, skeptics, and various and sundry other non-believers in Raleigh, Durham, Chapel Hill, and the surrounding areas. If you haven't renewed your membership for 2021, this is my subtle pitch for you to make your way over to trianglefreethoughtsociety.org and re-up. Maybe look for the little checkbox that we added to make your membership renew annually automatically. As a reminder, we are rooted in 4 pillars: service, community, education, and activism. And today we're combining 2 of these, education and activism. We're about to hear from Dr. Eitan Hersh, Associate Professor of Political Science at Tufts University. His research focuses on U.S. elections, voting rights, and civic participation. And he recently published a new book, Politics is for Power: How to Move Beyond Political Hobbyism, Taking Action and Making Real Change. So, of course, our activism is generally around separation of church and state issues, but we've heard from a number of our members when we started bringing meetings back that they want to learn how to take their activism from behind the keyboard directly to the General Assembly and even Congress to make a difference. So to that end, we have asked Dr. Hersh to come to speak to us. And with that, I will stop talking and I will turn it over to Dr. Hersh. If everybody who is unmuted could please mute so we don't accidentally talk over him or get echoes, I'm going to do that as well. And please meet Dr. Hersh.
Nice to meet all of you. Thank you for having me. It's nice to be here with you. So let me just remind myself. So we have an hour together. Is that right?
As long as you want. You want 3 hours, you got 3. Yeah,
so maybe I'll give a little spiel that summarizes what I've been up to, and then we can talk about it. Does that sound good?
This is your forum. You handle it however you like. We are open to all forms of presentation.
Okay, so let me get us started, and I'll tell you. I'm going to assume that not everyone has read my book cover to cover. Is that right? You haven't read the book, right? Some of you have. Beth has a copy and has little pieces of paper, so you've read it. So
you got at least 2 people who've read it.
Okay, so let me give a little bit of an update anyway on it, and then have a conversation. And I will say that I'm really interested in talking also about how your group is interested in getting engaged and what that means, either on church-state issues or on any issues really. As those of you who have read the book know, there's I don't want to say a religious theme, but there's religious organizations, a parallel between politics and religion are an interesting component of the book. I myself come from an active member in a religious community, but I'm always interested to hear about groups that, from a secular perspective, are trying to build tight-knit communities that serve and that are integral parts of the community in other ways. So anyway, I'm excited to be with you and have that conversation. I say as a bit of background, I normally don't write books like the book that you just read. I normally do work on very kind of quantitative oriented, boring work on topics like US elections and civic engagement and voting rights. I spend a lot of time working on issues like, how many people are going to be affected by this voter ID law, or someone's accusing of non-citizens voting. Is there anything to that claim? But I wanted to shift gears and write this book because I noticed this crazy disconnect in the world between the politics that I was teaching and the politics that I was doing, and not just me, but like everyone I knew was doing, right? So like everyone I knew, including me for a long time, was doing a form of politics that just didn't look like politics at all. It was a lot of time, right? So many people are spending an hour, 2 hours a day on politics, but it's news consumption and it's amateur punditry, like commenting on the news and then fighting with people who are commenting on the news in a way that you disagree with, and following like the minutia of politics, and just none of it looked like real politics, which is what I study, right? Like what I teach about. If I like my students, they said, well, what does it mean to do politics? I would say something very clear, like doing politics is working with other people with a strategy and a goal for influencing the government. That's like canvassing for a candidate is goal-oriented. You want a new person in office, and the strategy is getting people to vote for that person. Lobbying a local official, a state official, that's a strategy for persuading a lawmaker or a bureaucrat to go along with what you want. Goal, strategy, government, like that's what it is. And then everything else that we see is just doesn't look like that at all. It looks like something closer to sports fandom. It looks like something close to any kind of at-home leisure activity. That's what it feels like. And maybe in COVID times you could make an excuse for solitary action. Although I will argue that it's actually never been easier to get involved in local community than right now. But certainly before COVID, the politics as sort of solitary scrolling through your phone looked a little bit weird, right? So if we look at examples of this, one example I talk about is news consumption. And people push back on this. They're like, oh, I need to follow the news. I need to spend 2 hours a day on Twitter following the news to keeping up with it. And they're like, okay, well, why do you need to follow the news? Well, it's my civic duty to be informed. Okay, tell me, you're informed. You spend 2 hours a day on Twitter. Tell me who I should vote for in the next election here in Massachusetts. Oh, I don't follow anything about Massachusetts. Oh, tell me like how I can weigh in on some policy area I care about. I don't know how government really works, but I can just tell you everything Donald Trump has ever tweeted. I can tell you like every nonsense 24-hour news cycle kind of thing there is. That's the news I follow. It's not meant to actually teach us who to vote for. And by the way, most people are not voting at the state and local level, right? It's not teaching us how power flows in our community. It's just teaching us about gossip, basically. News consumption is a lot like that. Activism for a lot of people is a lot like that too. It's very token oriented. So, like it's signing an online petition. That's the most common form of activism in America, or attending a one-off protest or something like that. That's not feeding into any strategy. There's a story in the book about all the petitions that were signed to the Obama White House during the Obama years. And a colleague and I went through all those petitions and did an assessment of what they were about. And the story was that they're about nothing. So like if you add up all the petitions that went to the Obama White House on issues of taxes, healthcare, education, libraries, parental leave, that amounted to 5% of the petitions that went to the Obama White House. All that stuff combined. It was mostly just a bunch of garbage, like the FDA shouldn't regulate premium cigars, or like the White House should recognize diaphragmatic hernia awareness day. Just all little stuff that's not really what we would consider central to our political lives. So the first part of the book, or the first goal of the book, is to try to diagnose like what the heck are we all doing when we're doing politics, right? We have this very heightened sense of news interest and cognitive engagement in politics, coupled with actually pretty low levels, even in the Trump era, of real political organizing, right? Volunteer time. So the vast majority of people, like 90% of people who are spending an hour or more a day in politics, are not doing any volunteerism. Most of the people who follow the news every single day belong to 0 organizations. In the last year, they say they've worked 0 times with anyone else on any kind of civic or political venture. They say they've gone to 0 meetings, right? So everyone in this room, you've now done much more just by being in a room like this than the majority of not just Americans, but the highest news consuming Americans. Right, so we have this weird thing happening. So the second goal of the book is to evaluate whether this is happening more now than in the past. And I won't get too into details, mostly because I want to get to a conversation about technology and all the reasons why we do this more now than in the past. The third goal of the book is to talk about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing that so many of us are engaging in political hobbyism. The book is sort of geared to someone who's like a little bit offended by the accusation of political hobbyism. Like, get off my back. If I want to do politics like this, mind your own business. And I'm thinking about them every step of the way, thinking, what are their excuses, right? And one excuse that comes up a lot, I mean, there's a whole bunch of excuses that I won't even get into. I mean, a lot of excuses, I can't do anything, I have no role to play, politics is screwed up for all sorts of reasons that I'm conveniently not responsible for. gerrymandering and money in politics and electoral college, all that stuff, it's not on me. The next set of the defenses people have is, hey, like I'm better than the person who's not engaged in politics at all, right? Like, okay, maybe I just follow stupid gossipy news on Twitter or on cable news, but like, aren't I at least better than the person who doesn't do that at all? And my answer is no, you're worse. That when we do political engagement like a kind of an at-home leisure activity, we're making politics worse. We're making politicians behave badly when we do that. I can give some examples of that. But we also are developing a terrible skill set that makes it harder for us to participate in politics. And so what I mean by that is something really simple, which is that in any kind of power relationship, when we're trying to get other people to do what we want them to do, right? That's what I mean. Politics is our power. What does that mean? That means, how do we exert influence over other people so that they'll do what we want them to do? And we are in everyday situations like that. Like I want to exert some power over my children, like to get them to take a bath when they don't want to, right? Or my students want to try to get me to give them a better grade. Or, people have bosses and employees, and they're always in these strategic situations where they're trying to get someone to do something. And in all those situations, the basic recipe for success is empathy. It's figuring out what does the person on the other side of the conversation want? How do I consider what they care about? How do I meet them where they are and bring them to my side? And in politics, when we do it as like a hobby, that's not the goal at all, right? That what instead, it's like, how do I express myself? How do I get something off my chest? How do I make myself heard? That is not a recipe for getting anywhere with someone else, right? Get someone to say, what do they think? What do they want? And so I think in oftentimes when you shift from hobbyism to real politics, you realize, oh, this whole time I was following the news and learning about like what was going viral on social media, I'm not only learning the wrong information, I'm actually practicing the wrong skill set. So that's one sense in which we're actually making things worse. We're making it worse for ourselves for advancing our own goals. The last goal of the book is and if you've read it, this really becomes kind of the main goal of the book, is to talk about the alternative to political hobbyism. That is, what are some examples and lessons about how to do politics the right way, right? Because everything I just said so far is kind of a bummer. Like we're doing this thing wrong. It's worse than it's ever been. We're making politics worse. We're all a bunch of losers. But like the real story of the book, if you read it, is actually what's the alternative. And I talk about the alternative through a series of 7 stories of volunteer organizers, ranging in age from about 19 to 98, who all do politics in a totally different way than I think many of us are accustomed to. Like they do it by thinking about, how do you get things done? How do you change people's minds? Since you're in North Carolina, I'll tell you that one of the stories is about an amazing intergenerational activist group in Davidson, North Carolina. And what's special about this group is basically what happened is there was a student, Drew, at Davidson College, who was part of the College Democrats group. And he realized that the College Democrats group didn't do anything useful anyway. They basically sat around eating pizza and talking politics. And he didn't think that was a very useful thing for an organized group of Democrats to do. Meanwhile, there were a bunch of older folks in the community and in the county who were official members of like the local Democratic Party, but they didn't do anything either. They kind of just sat around and also ate a version of pizza and talked politics. And so Drew decided to start a precinct committee in Davidson that was a partnership between students who were there and had a lot of energy, and the residents of the town, mostly seniors who lived in the town, who are willing to give some time to this. And you had in Davidson basically this combination of a lot of youthful energy and time with a lot of experience, mostly retirees, who could get the students connected to real issues, right? And what I'll say about this group is fascinating is that young people, like young people in many college campuses, are all on the very far left, like Bernie Sanders types. And the older Democrats in the town even were, on the Biden side of the Democratic Party. The reason they can work together, and they do work together, is a few reasons. One is they work on issues that both sides care about. Both sides care about issues like racial equality, voting rights in North Carolina, housing affordability in their community. And when you start to remove the politics from the national back and forth into a local community, it becomes really concrete and it becomes projects to do. The second thing is that the students were brought in, were in a position of leadership. That is, they weren't the only leaders. The committee also had older folks, but the students were not just like soldiers in someone else's army. They were really a big part of the direction of the whole thing. So there's just amazing stories that have come out of this Davidson group. Some things that are really simple, like as you probably know, there's been a lot of back and forth about North Carolina's voter ID law, and the students, and with the help of savvy grown-ups in the community, made sure that like Davidson College's student ID counted as an ID for the voter ID law. Simple things like that actually required back and forth with lawyers and the state board of elections and all sorts of stuff. So anyway, that's the story of the Davidson students, and they're really doing amazing stuff. Maybe I'll just end with my favorite story in the book, which is about this 98-year-old man whose name is Nach. And if you read the book, you'll tell me if this is your favorite story too, but it's my favorite story because this guy was such an unusual person. I learned that there was someone in Boston who was called the Ukrainian boss, who controlled 1,000 votes, who was under investigation at one point by the US attorneys, but who everybody somehow loved. And I was curious to meet someone who fit that description. I never heard of anyone like that. I was a little bit nervous and scared to meet someone, the Ukrainian boss. I thought there was something, I don't know, devious going on. But it turned out that that wasn't the story at all. The story is that there was this Russian immigrant, Nach, who came to Boston in the early 80s or mid 80s. And he settled in this basically retirement home for low-income seniors. And he basically was just sort of a do-gooder in his community. He would drive people to doctor's offices and drive people to get groceries. And he would put on like little programs in their community center. That's it, no politics, just a community-oriented person. And what happened was in the mid-90s, some of you remember, there was a big welfare reform bill that passed through Congress. And the first writing of that bill was that even people who were here completely legally, if they were immigrants, they were not working, they were going to be denied food stamps and things like that. That's even seniors living in nursing homes. And people freaked out, right? So like Catholic Charities said there was going to be a suicide epidemic among these seniors. Most of the people in Nach's community were basically Russian refugees. Like him, he was a Holocaust survivor. All these people were basically like coming from Russia and various parts of the former USSR. They were all freaked out. They were going to lose like their main source of sustenance. So Nach starts, first of all, like going to the news media and saying, hey, this is a big problem. But then he and his wife start running workshops to get their neighbors to pass the citizenship test. Most of them were eligible, but they had not filled out, it's a lot of work, and there had been no real objective for them, real reason for them to do it. So, but they start taking lessons and they start practicing for the English test and start learning the facts you have to learn about the Constitution or whatever to pass the citizenship test. Nach and his wife, they drive everyone they get 300 of their neighbors to pass the citizenship test over a period of a year or so. And in that time, the law was changed, so it didn't apply anymore to people in their position. But nevertheless, now they have this huge group of people who are all citizens. And Nach decides that he needs to keep these people involved politically so that they can protect their interests. And so before each election, he and his neighbors, they make a slate of candidates who support that, who they should support. They go and make sure all of the neighbors in the building vote for these set of people. And And within a few elections of this story happening, this precinct had 2 and then 3 times the turnout rate of all the other precincts. And everyone's basically voting the same way. And that's why the US Attorney's Office is like, what the hell is going on here? Is there some fraud? Is there some abuse? And what they learned is actually, no, like this was just a really great guy who had figured out that it was important for his community to vote. And everyone voted that way, not because they were like bullied, but because they respected him, because he had built trust. This is a guy who did zero politics until he was in his 70s. And so, you know, that's the story. Basically, because he had that high turnout and was well organized, politicians just came to him. They called him on his birthday. They then started driving him to the grocery store. If he had questions about issues that were small, like there was a lot of issues about mobility and the snow shoveling, or about big issues like issues about asylum and immigration things, they could talk. All the politicians do it. I'll say that the quote of the story is that I finished the book and had a copy of my book on hand, but it hadn't been published yet. And I wanted to go give it to Nach, who I then since became kind of close with and got to know. And he died right before the book came out. So in just a few days shy of his 99th birthday in January of last year. And I wanted to go to his funeral because when 99-year-olds die, there's not always like a lot of people who are there to support them anymore. And so I go to the funeral and there's, you know, a few dozen people actually from the Russian community. And then sitting in the front row of the funeral home are the governor of Massachusetts, the mayor of Boston, city councilors, and all of these officials. And, you know, none of them were there to get votes. There was like no votes to be gotten there. It was just about paying respect to this guy who did politics totally different than the rest of us, right? Like not on social media, no big news consumption. No one even outside of his own 1,000-person apartment building knew who he was, right? This person, politics was like contained to one low-income senior housing project in Boston. But in that world, he was a hero. And because of that, and because he brought people along with him, from the governor to the, I mean, he had Obama gave like a piece of, like a tribute to him. I mean, everyone in the political world knew who he was, because as much as it seems like a small thing to organize 300 people, nobody does it. Almost nobody can do that. And if you do it, you become a power broker and you can get things for communities you care about. So maybe I'll end it there and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about, but that's my story.
Thank you. So everybody on the call, our Zoom tip and trick: if you're on mute and you hold down your space bar, if you're on a computer, it will unmute you as long as you're holding your space bar. So that's a great way to unmute, ask a question, and then just release the space bar and you go right back to mute again. So you don't have to worry about echoes and other things. So I will open it up if anyone has a question and wants to just jump in. Hi, Jennifer, just mute.
Okay. Thank you for that, and thank you for this book, which I have also read. And I want to ask you a question about that last story that you told, because it is moving and wonderful in so many ways, but I'm also inclined to think about the same story having the opposite effect. And so I'm thinking about like influence as a way to garner trust and loyalty, and to be able then to influence a community of voters because of your investment in them, whether that's through services you provide, volunteer activities, social options, that sort of thing. And I'm picturing a version of that yields detrimental outcomes, or that leans toward a kind of anti-intellectualism that does not encourage people to think about why they're voting for things, but rather to say, this is the person I trust who has done this good stuff for me. I will do what he says. And so I wonder if you might talk a little bit about what the difference is between, you know, the story you just told on the one hand, and maybe the version of that that might lead people to vote against their own interest, for example?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you've really hit on, I think, a core fissure between what I think is standard fare, particularly on the political left, and the way that folks are organizing for politics on the political right. And let me just bring this right to a personal example, right? So I'm very involved in a religious community, and before election day, I live in Brookline, Massachusetts, where I am right now, which is like a 90% Democratic town. So before election day, I will send an email to all my friends who live here. I'm talking about for a local election, right? And these are nonpartisan elections. People don't know that, most people don't know anything about what's going on, but I'm pretty involved in the town politics, right? So I email all my friends and say, hey, here's my slate of people who I'm voting for. And if you have any questions, let me know. And after election day, I have multiple friends who text me and say, hey, thanks, I voted just because you told me who I should vote for. And you might look at that and say, like, wow, that is either icky or uncomfortable, because, like, did I just dupe those people? Most of them I know from my religious community, okay? And most of them were friends, and they trust me because they think we have shared enough interests that, I'm probably not going to lead them astray, right? Now, there's no coercion, and I'm not like a pastor. I'm just a member of a community with trust with other friends, right? In the same way that I defer to them all the time too, right? I have one guy who's like really good at woodworking, and when my things break, he helps me. And a million people here are doctors, and so when my kid, breaks this or scrapes that, I defer to them. And this is the division of labor in any community, right? They're deferring to me because I'm engaged in politics and I'm a political scientist. But forget my political scientist, because I'm engaged, right? And that's how a lot of voter engagement works in religious communities, right? It's not on the political right. It's not a pastor saying vote for this person. It's a network of trusted people who trust one another saying these people are aligned with our interests. Now, on the left, what you have is something that is like almost like triage for the absence of that. That is, you have all of these strategies, get out the vote strategies, door knocking, phone banking, messaging, postcards, that are all versions of voter engagement where strangers are talking to strangers. And that's all happening because of an absence of personal ties. And it's effective in the sense that it's scientifically proven to increase voter turnout by this percentage points, but it is a Band-Aid compared to the thing that I just described, right? It is not very potent compared to the thing I described. How could it be? These are my friends. I'm getting my friends to vote, right? And so then, like, what is the moral implication of of all this? Which is, I think, getting to your actual question, Jennifer, which is, I think that we have division of labor about everything in the world. So why not use those trust relationships for good? And other people are going to use it for what they think of as good. And I think they're wrong. But what choice do we have? I mean, if I sent a 10-page email to my friend, say, this candidate has this preferences on policing and on healthcare and on the environment, they would never vote, right? And they're not voting for the policy reasons per se. They're voting because they don't want me. Like, if we're being like very honest, they're voting that way probably because they don't want their friend to be disappointed in them. And so I think some people are going to say, no, thank you. And some people are going to say, that's how politics works. And the people who are in the latter camp are going to win elections.
Thanks. And just as a quick follow-up, it's interesting to me that the examples you gave when you were talking about your circle of friends was about knowing who the experts were among them for the particular thing they needed. Like, we go to the doctor for advice about our health. We go to the political science for advice about how those things work. And I feel like that's still a sticking point for me. I'm kind of because that I understand, right? Like that we might turn to expertise and trust that because that's something we don't know about, versus I trust the dude who helped me jump my car last week because he was nice to me. That seems
Okay.
like an important distinction.
Okay, can I give you one more uncomfortable version of this then? Is that okay, everyone? Sorry. And I love this example because you'll see why I want to talk about it. Okay, so I was out, this is also a personal anecdote, but I was in New Hampshire before COVID with two of my kids at one of these county fairs. You guys have the same thing, I'm sure, right? Like town fairs, county fairs, the rides and the food and all that. So at every county fair that you'll ever go to, there's always a Democratic booth and a Republican booth from like the local county or town or whatever. And they're the loneliest booths in all of the fair, right? They're just like someone with clipboard and some bumper stickers to pass out, and no one goes to that. Who would? Like, why would anyone show up? Now, in that area where their booths were, I was walking with my kids, and there was a church had a booth. This is in New Hampshire, and the church's booth was a GAC making activity for kids. GAC, for those who don't know, is like a Play-Doh. So it's like you mix some cornstarch and some food coloring, whatever it is. And my kids were like, "Can we make GAC?" And I said yes. And so we sat down at this church booth, and there were two very nice volunteers. And within about 2 minutes, they realized I was not a good recruit for them, both because I'm Jewish and because I don't live in New Hampshire. And we ended up having a very nice conversation about running children's programming for our respective institutions. And my kids had a great time. And I thought to myself, wow, like if I were looking for community, if I was new to town, I just had a great experience with people who were really nice and provided a family activity. And my second thought was, how come the Democratic and Republican Party booths never do that? And it's, is it icky that my synagogue and this church and that church all have programming for kids? That is not religious programming. It's like, you can leave your kids in this this air-conditioned space, and you have an hour of peace, right? Is that like duping me by providing some service to engage in religion or politics or whatever? So again, I think there's a fissure here. Some people say that the whole booth thing, getting kids, family activities in order to get people involved in the church or getting people involved in politics is icky. And other people say, no, that's what churches do. They do it for a good reason. It's because they want to serve people's material needs, and then that builds community, and then religion also is part of that community. But politics, you could see the same thing, right? I would love for a Democratic or Republican Party to have a GAC making booth, because what they would be doing is they'd be saying, here's our values. Our values are we want to build community. We want to speak to the needs of parents with young kids. It's hard to be a parent with young kids. And our policies do that. Like, we're also advocating for policies that serve these needs. And we're going to show you, we're not just going to tell you about policy. We're going to show you we care about you. But again, like, there's no getting around that can be used for bad, and it can be really icky.
Can I say something here? I work with the Democratic Party in Wake County, and we are actually doing that particular thing right now. We are engaging in our community, working with nonprofits to say, here we are out here supporting the community. And so that we can say, we don't want just your vote. We want to know how you feel about the community and how you need things supported and what issues you need, taken care of. So right now we are doing a great reform of what people think politics is for the Democratic Party and the community, so that you can see that we are engaged. Here we are. We're not just here for your money.
That's huge. I can't wait to hear more how that goes.
It's working out rather well. We've engaged with several nonprofits, to help support, women's issues and, support local community activities. So,
but then how do you respond to Jennifer's point? Because I mean, look at Jennifer's point. It comes up every single time I talk about this, right? Because people are uncomfortable with it.
Well, I mean, and I'm actually in a book club with her that we read this book together. So I know Jennifer, and I understand where she's coming from, where she thinks it's coercion as opposed to, support as a, you are giving good advice. You may be giving good advice for you, not for the person that's voting. So, so that's how she feels. It's not all just, a good favor that this is who I'm voting for. It's a trust issue. We have to trust the person that you're actually getting that information from, so seeing that you are doing a good job, but also seeing how you live your life, how you engage in your community, and seeing that you are, a good person. That's how I feel that you could trust your opinion.
I think it comes down to what we call in marketing, push marketing versus pull marketing. There's a difference between you sending out to everybody, here's a slate that I personally wrote and you should listen to me, versus somebody who trusts you reaching out to you and saying, hey, I know that you go to every picnic and I know that you go to every meet and greet. Who do you think I should vote for? So when someone's, asking you for your opinion, it seems less icky to me than if you're yelling your opinion at people. The difference between popular and populist, it's kind of.
Yeah, and it's true. And there's also, of course, like an ecosystem for this where, the people who I email my slate to might very well get emails from other people saying, don't listen to her, she's an idiot, saying, or a nicer way to say it's like, well, we have a different perspective here. And, to be very frank, like I think in our own community where most people are Democrats, there's an age divide on a lot of the local issues related to housing affordability and schooling and transit and environment and all sorts of things. And so, I know like the older folks in our own community like are not on the same page with me. That's okay. And, it's in that sense, it's not coercive. I think that's true in most communities, that if there is a difference of opinion, and sometimes there's not, but if there is, then that makes itself known, I think.
I was going to say my involvement in the past with some organizations that try to do things politically were with the Sierra Club and Citizens Climate Lobby. Both of those see themselves as nonpartisan organizations, but they've largely become partisan because of the kind of desertion by Republicans in dealing with environmental issues. And I think that's occurring in other areas outside of the environment as well, where they've, have really deserted large areas of governing and in many cases replaced it just with religious issues.
Yeah, although, I guess the only response I would have to that, I think that's to some extent true, but there's really a lot of there's whenever you work, I think, at below the national level on issues, the Democrat Republican story breaks down pretty quick. That is, the Democratic Party is not on board with big climate change stuff altogether. I mean, there's lots of internal disagreement about stuff like that. I'll just give my home state as an example. It's a very Democratic state here in Massachusetts. We send these firebrand liberals to the U.S. Senate. Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey are our senators, but we have a really business-oriented Republican governor who has 90% approval with Democrats, and he wins on claims like that he'll never raise gas taxes by a penny. I mean, how is it possible that we're sending to Washington people who are like Green New Deal and they're very popular, and we send to our own state house people who are like, we don't actually want you to do anything like that because we don't have to pay for it, right? So those are, I think, Democrats who, within the Democratic Party, they have really wide-ranging views on these issues, and even internally, they have a lot of cognitive dissonance where they want one thing, but then when it actually comes to paying for it, they're not sure they really want it. And that's true on the Republican side too. I mean, I think you see, I've given talks like in Utah, Brigham Young University. It's sort of like the Republican version of where I live. And it's all the same issues. I mean, they're dealing with the same issues of housing and transit and blah, blah, blah. And there are divisions within the Republican Party, just like there are in the Democratic Party on those issues. It's just that at the national level, all of that gives way to just polarized fights, right? And it does that because it's so easy. Like, it's so easy for everyone in Massachusetts who's a liberal to say, Ted Cruz is my nemesis, and Mitch McConnell and all of these people, and it's very convenient. But then when it's at home, it's like, okay, are we actually going to implement policies that are consistent with our liberal values or not? The answer is probably not.
We have kind of the opposite thing here. Like, our governors tend to be Democrat, and our senators and president, we tend to go Republican.
Right, and you do have the same, I think, at the state level, there's all sorts of strange bedfellows. It's not just, there it's probably more polarized at the state level also than it is in other places. But I think that it's not like if you get your, Democratic majority at the state house, you're all of a sudden going to have, AOC's policy preferences. That's like, that's not where the state or anyone is.
One thing, though, I think, as a whole, the Democrats, even though they have differing views, they actually see it as an issue. And it used to be that Republicans did, like with environmental issues, but that's become less and less so. And with something like climate change, that's something that, we have to deal with. But there's a whole segment of our society who don't see, just see it as an opinion, not as something that we actually, as a society, have to deal with. Like if we were being attacked by a foreign power or something. And so I find that kind of mind-boggling. And that side has this strong religious element, and basically there's a large, strong anti-science kind of view among a lot of those people. So it's it's not a good situation, and we saw that with I think the pandemic. I've seen that with the pandemic, where they're just resistant to reason and facts, just doing really basic things like wearing a mask, and it's not good.
Right. So then the question becomes, okay, so what's your strategy, right? What's the goal? What's the strategy, right? And I think for a lot of people, the goal is it's never beyond like, they're a bunch of idiots, and therefore, like, I'm gonna be, in my world, and they can be in their world, and then, let it burn. Or they say, there are some people I talk to in the book who are like, if I have to convince someone who hates science and is devoutly religious on the merits of my argument, then it's like it becomes like I have to deal with the fact that I'm not obviously right, right? Like if I was obviously right, I wouldn't have to convince anyone. And so then the question is, okay, like given the environment that you're in, how do I get more people on my side?
Well, Citizens Climate Lobby, we actually went to Washington and lobbied people, congressmen and senators and all of them. And a lot of them, the Republicans would meet us, and some of them would be very agreeable and everything, but they were too scared to do anything. And so, there was a contingent that were reluctant, didn't believe in what we were doing. But I think actually probably a majority kind of understood that it was a problem, but, didn't see it as a political thing to do because they would get voted out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really thinking about, the voters, right? I mean, if you're like, now I'll tell you a little story, which is one of the best organizers I studied in the book is this woman, Angela, who's in a very conservative area of Pennsylvania. And this particular story is not from the book. It's the story she told me afterwards, but it just really goes to show how good she is at this, which is she was knocking on doors. She's wearing her pin from her local liberal organization and a clipboard. She knocks on this door, and this is, an overwhelmingly Trump voting county. And the guy just opens the door and says, "I hate paying taxes." That's all he said when he opened the door. And without missing a beat, right? If in that situation, if I was knocking on someone's door from a liberal organization, the person just opened up the door and screamed at me, "I hate paying taxes," I would just walk away. Like, God, what am I going to do in this situation? Angela just screams right back, "I hate paying taxes too." And then she says, "Isn't it awful? We pay these taxes and companies don't pay anything, and the roads are terrible, and the schools are underfunded, and we're paying taxes and the big companies aren't," and blah, blah. She went into this rant. And that guy is now canvassing with Angela, okay? That is a Trump voter who had a knee-jerk reaction to just seeing a liberal and is now working with them. And so, that gives me hope that people can convince each other. And it's about figuring out what's going on in that other person's head that's going to move them.
That part of the book that you told about what is your story and how can you convince somebody through your story was really good, because then you think about it in a different way. I was unfortunate and I had problems in my life, and what can that relate to your life? So that kind of gets them to be more in tune to, we're people, we're both people, we both have problems. What can we do to solve these problems? So it was an education for me on how canvassing can be different than not just go and say, vote for these people. You kind of go and feel what they feel, and then have a conversation with them.
Yeah, and it's hard. And sometimes it's just you really, a lot of times you're just going to encounter someone who, what you think and they know what they think, and you're on opposite sides, and it's kind of zero sum. And the only solution is just to get more voters than they get so that they lose. But in a lot of other situations, particularly below the national level, when you have most people are not even voting at all, there's a huge opportunity, which is they don't have well-formed opinions, and they haven't thought through what their interest is. And they haven't encountered anyone necessarily who is just patient and interested in them. And, it's these are real opportunities. I mean, when I'll say this to you guys because I'm interested in your organization. I mean, when I speak with religious groups about this book, it really feels like if you're doing politics, you're doing something that you have a mission to do. You're changing lives. You have a chance to change someone's life when you are canvassing or engaging in politics at all by connecting with another human, and maybe that conversation is going to really change the trajectory of how they think about politics, how they vote for their whole lives. And that comes from a sense that it's worth my time, right? It is, all of these votes, there's just so many millions of votes, nothing matters. It's a drop in the bucket. What possibly could change, to a position where it's I have a chance to change someone's life every time I canvass. And there's no reason that message should resonate more with religious people or secular people, but it's definitely tied more into language that we hear a lot in religious communities, that I am on a mission to change someone's life. But it's true that everyone could do that in politics.
Hi, this is Joel. So something that kind of stood out to me of what you've been saying. By the way, formerly from, born and raised out of Framingham, Massachusetts. Something that stood
Still
out
a Red Sox fan, I hope.
What you have said. Yeah, I'm a diehard Red Sox, Patriots, Celtics, you name it. I will never change my loyalties there. Yeah, so one of the things that stood out is what you were saying about listing things on your profile or on social media versus showing up when you're canvassing or whatever, you're talking to the people, or even what you were saying, like with the differences in the booths, like with the church was doing this activities with the children versus the other one's got a clipboard. It's kind of like the church is kind of showing more about who you are. And the person with a clipboard isn't so much doing that as much or doing anything at all. I think it also helps when you do show up, instead of tell people and list things off, your political points or whatever, that you can get rid of some of the biases. People may be more open to listen to what you have to say. I've noticed this in my own experience. I lived in Washington State for about 8 years, just moved here about a few years ago. And one of the things I remember hearing about, and you were talking about kids and interacting with the church and churches getting them in programs and stuff like that. One of the things that I remember, and I've heard a lot of success about at a Washington State, was they had a summer program called Camp Quest Northwest. The way I heard about it was from a radio show. It's also an atheist podcast called Ask an Atheist with Sam Mulvey, and apparently some of the people on that show or that podcast work on this, but like getting the kids involved with the free thought, but like they're actually doing stuff and they're learning about, they're kind of demonstrating who they are and their values and their attention to the community, versus like, I don't like, having a list and saying, I don't like this, that, and this other thing about, this politician or something. And I feel like that's a lot more effective in getting out in the community and making a change at the local level than those listings. And what's the easy thing to do, which is to say like, A, B, and C and put it on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep. And actually, I think it's, Matt, maybe you can correct me, it's Camp 42 is the sort of very similar thing that's actually available in North Carolina as well.
Yeah, so in the Southeast, Camp Quest kind of in half just for the logistics of running a cross-country organization. And one of our members actually is one of the key people in the Southeast version, which is Camp 42, which is, they're still best friends. They just, logistically, it was easy to run out of 2 different locations.
Cool.
Yeah, I had a question for you. So in the book, you mentioned that overall party organizations are hollow. And I was kind of curious. I've actually asked a couple of candidates about like, do they have any goals and sort of like trying to empower the party organization versus just their own. And I've only gotten sort of BS answers back. And I'm kind of curious, do you think we should expect candidates to help fix that? Or is there some other approach that you think is more important there?
Well, that's a great question. So, there are a few candidates out there a few politicians who really believe in the party apparatus or in its potential. And most don't. Most, if they already are in office, they basically won without the party, right? Because the party organization doesn't do very much, right? The goal of having a robust party organization, say at the local level, is that in years that are up or down for the party, you still have a group of volunteers who are there to serve the general interest and not any one campaign. And it goes right into the conversation we had at the beginning about, sending your slate to your friends, which is that below the national level, maybe below the governor level, people are not voting for the candidates by name in any real way. They're not voting for celebrities. They're voting for people. They don't know, the vote history of the members of Congress. They mostly don't know anything about why they're voting for this person, but they will vote not based on, Donald Trump or Joe Biden. They'll vote based on if someone they know and trust tells them who to vote for. And a political party is all about institutionalizing that. So there's a group of people who walk around and be like, here's our people. These are our people. And you should vote for these people. And none of them have to be a social media star, right? The point is that you have a group of volunteers and maybe paid people and donors who all believe in the cause of the party, and they might not like any one candidate, but who cares? On average, they think it's right. So, it takes someone committed to that vision, like a real organizer, to do that. Generally speaking, we don't have much of it. And a lot of people would prefer to build something from scratch, and in part they want to build something from scratch because the parties in a lot of places have not been open to them, right? If you go and try to join the local party, they might be like, well, we don't want to do any of that. And then it's like infuriating because you want to do something and they don't want you to do it. So people end up starting their own thing, which is okay, but it doesn't have the brand of the party and doesn't have that long-term sustainability. But that's the idea. I mean, it's no more complicated than just essentially routinizing this idea that we should build grassroots around a cause that's bigger than any one candidate.
I also found that because local politics is usually non-affiliated, because we don't have like it's a Democrat running for, mayor. We pretty much have non-affiliate. And so it's hard to get the party to get behind people, because we've had a situation where the guy that was running for, the mayor didn't want everybody to know that he was a Democrat, so that it's hard for the Democratic Party to get behind, and make it more of a, party thing locally.
Right. And then within, if there's 4 people running for mayor and 2 of them are like sort of Democrats and 2 of them are sort of Republicans, they disagree with each other. So then the parties don't want to generally endorse people and they feel like uncomfortable making endorsements. And then that just leaves it to everyone else. But if you have a robust endorsement process, right, so that the party does endorse people, you have a better chance of winning because you help reduce people's informational hurdles.
So if you're going to give us homework of, it was January, we were doing our resolutions for the year, what would be, say, the top 3 things you'd recommend we do after reading your book and coming to a meeting like this with you to just as individuals make our voices heard more or make us more impactful?
Yeah, so I mean, I would say like there's a few things you can do. One is change the culture around how you engage in political conversation and politics in general, right? So don't fall into the trap of talking about, gossiping about polling averages and, what Trump said. Talk about politics in the community and in the state and what people are doing. I know like people come to my house for dinner or, in some Zoom version of that. I don't talk about Nate Silver's polling things, or if my university says, hey, will you host a debate watch party? No, I won't. I will not do that, but I will host any organizer. I will talk about real politics and strategy, but I'm not gonna encourage the worst forms of political hobbyism. So I think changing the way we all talk about politics is useful. I think also like really thinking about our news diet. Do we actually know what's going on in our community? Do we actually know like how decisions are made, who's in charge of things, why? It's okay. I mean, obviously a lot of people love following national news, but that should be in our total news diet, a pretty small component compared to the state and local stuff, which is harder to find information about. So it takes a little more work, but we can do it. I mean, everyone could make their social media feed be dominated by state and local news things, but almost no one does that, right? So I think working a little harder at that. And then I would say like, organizational involvement. I mean, so beyond this organization, maybe this organization is doing like real political things, but maybe there's something in your community that is tied to some policy issue you care about or brings you in conversation with more people. What I've noticed is that there's, if you start small and local, you're always going to be connected to bigger things, right? It's like if you only say I only care about national politics, you're never going to find out what's going on in your community. But if you are engaged at the community level, you are going to get a lot of interesting insights into what's happening at every level of government, because the people who are going to be talking about it and people are going to be connecting in different issues. You'll see the connection between this issue and that issue in this city and that city. And I just think that, going bottom up in terms of participation is in general much more gratifying. Well, thank you all for having me here. Any other last minute questions?
Not a question, just sort of a closing comment. I want to say, thanks for presenting to us, and thanks for writing the book. I found it very helpful, and definitely have decided that as we open up again post-pandemic, my goal with some of our TFS events is to make sure we're doing some of the things you recommend about engagement with the community in person where possible, to really try and drive that trust and community aspect, so that we can then sort of leverage all of our power together toward our goals.
That's awesome. Really great to be part of your tiny part of your story here. That's awesome.